Welcome to The Flower of Freedom by Deborah J. Reeves. I'm Deborah, and this is my original work, and all rights to it and the presentation are reserved. What isn't reserved, however, is our measure of appreciation for you and for taking the time out of your busy day to share a few minutes with us. We hope in return you get some entertainment and a bit of relaxation. Here we go. This is chapter 64. It's called Vigilance. The moment she walked onto the patio, Hans took notice of the girl. He noticed the snow on her cap and in her collar of her ski jacket. He noticed the scrape on her cheek. So he approached her with tender concern. He asked if she might like to share a cup of hot chocolate with him and perhaps some pastries. "You'll be perfectly safe. The restaurant is right there, and it is filled with people," he assured her. "Do I look like I could be a bad guy?" he asked in a wounded tone. She was thrilled to have someone notice her, so she jumped at the opportunity. Hot chocolate and pastries sounded good to her, so she went into the restaurant with him. Hans belonged to a category of men who would later be known as groomers. They had a specific way of approaching their prey. They did not want the noise and attention. They preferred to convince their victims, sometimes over many approaches, to come across and along willingly, even happily. The issue at this moment was that Hans's frustration at being unable to find Bertie was mounting. Men like Hans appeared to have become cross-wired along the way. When they felt frustration, worry, or anxiety, the internal container in which they held those feelings often spilled over onto the container for sexual arousal or for risk-taking. When Hans was fully in control of his environment, he stalked and he planned and he took calculated risks. When he was challenged and frustrated, he took greater risks. This was one of those times, and Hans was on the hunt. As the little girl and the man sat at Hans' preferred table, far from the windows, one of his normal servers came forward with a container of coffee. As the little girl pulled off the rainbow cap, it exposed the full length of her thin blonde braids. Hans said, "No coffee for me today. My guest and I would like hot chocolate and your finest plate of pastries." You do not get to be head of SS in Paris without being observant. Hans had watched the terror in the eyes of many who had just become fully aware of the fate that awaited them. He knew that it had stages. Many started out angry and aggressive, then they tried to bargain and wheedle, and then they got depressed and resigned. They always had an extra ring of white around the irises of their eye, because they were holding their eyes open wider to take in as much information as they could get in order to survive. It seemed to be an uncontrollable survival impulse from their brains. Hans saw that white ring around the eyes of the server now as she looked at the little girl. Hans sighed and remembered that the woman had told him that she was a mother. Hans stayed calm, but when he saw the lodge manager walk past his table a few minutes later, and when the manager glanced surreptitiously in his direction and away again quickly, he knew something was off. You do not survive as a war criminal without being paranoid, he thought. Funny that they still call it paranoid when there's a good reason for the alarm bells you're sensing. Hans told Julia, his guest, that he needed to go to his room for a moment because he had forgotten something there, and that he would only be gone long enough to go up the elevator into his room and back down the elevator. please don't leave," he said. "I'm enjoying your company so much. Help yourself to the pastries if they arrive before I get back," he said, smiling across the table with wide, innocent blue eyes. He casually rose, and he walked out of the dining room, and he went through the lobby to the elevators. As the doors closed, he saw the man at the desk speaking into the phone with his hand partially wrapped around the mouthpiece, as though he did not wish to be overheard. Hans exited the elevator and ran to his room. Once there, he grabbed the folder that held his travel documents, cash, and various identifications that he always had at the ready. Leaving everything else behind, he walked back out of his room and down the corridor in the opposite direction from the elevators. He took the stairs down to the ground floor, and he pulled on a different hat and gloves. He put the sedate ones that he had been wearing into a dumpster behind the hotel. He then strolled down the pedestrian mall to the cable car and down to the train platform. He needed to go to Zurich to close his numbered bank account anyway. The man he did business with was expecting him on Sunday, but he would be flexible. Hans was really annoyed that this stupidity with the hotel and that girl had cost him his chance to see his son. Hans took the very next train out. He did not care where it went, and he sat back with a newspaper and a magazine that he had purchased at the station from a brunette who was flirting with him, fully relaxed. At the end of that track, he would buy another ticket to Zurich. When Marie saw the man leave the restaurant, she jumped up and she went to the little girl. "May I sit here a moment?" she asked. Bewildered, the girl nodded. The server watched and listened from behind a room divider. "My name is Marie. I have a true story to tell you. When my mother was a little girl, not much older than you, that man you were sitting with hurt her a lot. After he hurt her, she had a baby. That baby was my brother. Our mother survived, but the other girls that he hurt did not. You have made a very bad mistake by trusting him." The girl looked at her with wide eyes, and tears started to drip. "I did not come to scare you. Rather, my friends and I were wondering if you would care to come to our table and we will buy you lunch. We think that it's far too dangerous for you to try to go to your room until your parents come back. But that man will not be able to get you if you are sitting with a whole bunch of us who know what he's trying to do." The girl nodded, and her braids flopped backward and forward. Marie held out her hand, and the little girl clasped it. They walked across the restaurant to the group of friends sitting in the bright window. Philippe had moved to sit next to Bianca so that the little girl could sit next to Marie. Marie placed Julia in the middle of the table between herself and Joseph. That's the end of chapter 64. Vigilant, good people can make all the difference, and we're glad you're here to share this story with us. I remain your friend, Deborah. Bye-bye.